Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod. Hello, everyone. Today, we are going to engage the topic and the relatively recent archetype of the detective. The detective, the spy, the private eye, the investigator, which is the theme of many a mystery novel, a murder mystery, a podcast, TV show, and the list goes on and on. It appears that the idea of the detective is relatively modern, and Dickens is kind of credited with having really lifted this up as a theme. But of course, it goes way back in time as a spy, he who has secret knowledge. But today we are interested in what is it about the detective and about the crime, whatever the crime is, that has seized hold to such an astonishing degree of the popular imagination. What are we really looking for when we are following in the steps of the detective to find out who done it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, people love true crime. I love true crime podcasts. I really do. They love, TV shows that feature detectives and policemen, people solving crimes. That I think is the essence here of what this is there's something has happened and there needs to be some effort put forward to understand what has happened and to find truth and justice. So those are kind of the essential elements.
The part that always gets me are the murder mysteries. And that in a way, the murder is really symbolic because it's not as if there's really a lot of heartfelt feeling about it. There may be a grieving family or a grieving spouse somewhere, but really it's about the whodunit. And that we're a little bit cavalier about the dead body that is suddenly discovered somewhere underground or somewhere unexpected. That it's almost the trope of a story of find a dead body.
And I think left to our own instincts, we'll make up stories about who done it, and we'll accuse people or we'll fantasize about something. What's interesting about the detective is this combination of thinking and intuition. And so much of the Sherlock Holmes model is this irrefutable evidence, this kind of scientific accumulation of facts that then leads to a conclusion. Because I think it's natural for human beings to wonder how something happened. In the most ancient of times, undoubtedly, tragedy happens, a spouse disappears, somebody is injured. I think it's natural for all of us to then want to find a narrative, like the what happened kind of narrative.
Mm-hmm.
But the detective is the one who's scouring for irrefutable facts, regardless of what the personal feelings are about it. And that's kind of an evolution of objectivity in the human psyche.
Yeah, and going along with that is the truth that the answer is always surprising. It's never who you first expect. In fact, a really good mystery novel is going to lead you down the garden path and make you suspect this person and that person and this person. And then only at the end, with some shock, do you realize that it's none of those people, that it's someone else altogether. But I think, Joseph, I appreciate what you're saying about this kind of evolution of objectivity. We have to be allowed to be surprised by evidence, by that which is objective, rather than simply sort of,
hunches or feelings.
Yeah, exactly.
So this rise of empiricism, of the empirical method.
Yes.
So, it's the 1800s is when these stories start getting published, but that's also the rise of the scientific method as well.
And so we get the rise also of the sort of hard-boiled sleuth who raises his objectivity to new heights. And he may be very cynical. He may be jaded.
He looks jaded on the surface, but really he's got a tender heart. That's always the way it is.
Sometimes he does. Yeah. I don't know that Sherlock Holmes has a tender heart, but he's cloaked in a way, in his trench coat and carrying his gun and wearing that hat, whether it's sort of the deer hunter hat that Sherlock Holmes typically wears. He takes on all the attributes of a sort of anti-hero, and he may not have a heart of gold, but we need him. Do we like him? I think we're ambivalent about some of these hard-boiled guys who trample over everybody's feelings. I remember as a kid listening to Dragnet, and Jack Webb, the good cop, somebody would be saying, "Oh, and it was so terrible," and I was listening, and he would just say, "Just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts."
Right. So the detective is brilliant. He's using deduction. He's intensely focused. Often, if we have a glimpse into their personal lives, they are often portrayed as very austere and somewhat secretive.
With personal problems.
Yeah.
Always. They drink too much. Their health is bad. They're alone. They've had their heart broken, or they have a trail of women whose hearts they've broken. They're usually not like
attachment disorder.
Exactly. Thank you. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet all that is turned to the great benefit of society.
But it's a great way of amplifying those ego functions of thinking and intuition and our ambivalence of, yes, if there's a crime to solve, don't we want one of these fictional detectives who always succeeds to be the one on the job figuring it out? But we wouldn't want to invite him to dinner.
Well, I don't know. I'm going to have to, I push back, Deb. I think I read more of these than you do.
Lisa finds this much more sexy, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's some of them I would absolutely want to have for dinner, really, really, kind of. I mean, so part of it is, I think what we're saying, though, is that the detective is often a loner and an outsider.
Yes,
He's outside, in some way, outside the social order much of the time. So I'm thinking of Jackson Lamb from the series Slow Horses that's been serialized on Apple TV and stars Gary Oldman as the kind of washed up, very, unwashed, flatulent, alcoholic, head of the agency there.
But he's not the one you want to invite for dinner.
No, well,
is he?
I don't know. I mean, he's pretty funny. He's pretty funny. But the other one that comes to mind is J.K. Rowling's books, which he's written under a pen name, Robert Galbraith, the Strike, this Cormoran Strike novels. He's really sort of doesn't belong to this class or that class. He kind of is in between categories in the social order. He kind of flits around the edges of high society, but he doesn't really belong there. He kind of says the wrong thing at all the parties because he drinks too much and then just lets his honest opinion fly out there. But he's got integrity. He has integrity and he cares about the right things, So he doesn't make much money, and so he kind of sleeps in this crummy flat above his office. Although I think he's coming up in the world a little bit as the series progresses. But yeah, no, he's a very kind of charming. Charming is not the right word. Compelling figure. Because he does carry this outsider energy. He was wounded in the wars. I think he was wounded in Afghanistan. He lost a leg. So it's this sense of someone who's seen something and knows stuff the rest of us don't want to know about. I mean, so this brings to mind this idea that the detective is he, or perhaps she, who knows how to deal with society's shadow.
Yes.
That's also like the story of Silence of the Lambs, where Hannibal Lecter is like this horrendous demonic force. And Clarissa is, this brave heroine who's like tolerating these horrors in order to unpack these gruesome crimes.
The detective metabolizes the shadow. So I have to tell you, I've never seen Silence of the Lambs because
oh my God, it's
too scary.
Shocking. It's so shocking. That and The Exorcist are the only two movies I've ever seen that had nightmares after I saw them.
I was living alone in DC when that movie came out. I was like, I probably shouldn't see that movie. So I've never seen it.
Yeah, it was shocking.
But, Clarissa is a different kind of detective. She is the young woman. She is innocent in many respects, and she takes on this really demonic, evil character of Hannibal Lecter. But there are that leads me into other women who are famously detectives. As a kid, I was into Nancy Drew. I just loved Nancy Drew.
Oh, she was great.
Our public library disdained buying Nancy Drew books. So I had to sneak into the Beacon bookstore and go into where the Nancy Drew books were and read 10 or 15 pages at a time before the lady kicked me out.
That is determination.
Oh, it was really such a big deal. Do I dare go in there again and try it out? But Nancy is a young woman. There's Harriet the Spy. Harriet the Spy is maybe 10 years old or so. There are the Hardy Boys. And then there are our adult detectives who are the little old lady, like Miss Marple, or that's Agatha Christie. And who's the other one? Jessica Fletcher. So the women detectives represent sort of the unlikely, who would suspect them of having this analytical, intuitive, deductive mind, because their cloak, unlike the trench coat and the fedora, is that they look so either young or just a kid, or like the proverbial little old lady who would never think to have the mind of a sleuth.
Going back to this thing about them being outsiders in some sense, is that in order to, there's this, and it's this wonderful psychological place, right? Where to ferret out the killer, you have to be able to think like a killer.
Yeah.
Right? So there's this way that the detective has a kind of secret identification with the murderer in some sense, in some kind of archetypal sense.
And that's very true in things like Batman and the Joker, where the law enforcement, the investigator, is also very shadowy and is part of that underground world.
So who are your favorite all-time detective sleuth spies?
Well, like I said, Cormoran Strike is really up there for me. Rowling usually publishes a new book. They usually come out in September, and one didn't come out last September. And I've been able to pre-order the next one, which I think is coming out around September. And there promises to be a big advance in the relationship between Strike and his young assistant Robin. So, I'm waiting for there's the romance aspect of it too, which is quite delicious. So yeah, so Cormoran Strike's a big favorite of mine. But I've also enjoyed the books by Henning Mankell, who I think is Swedish, part of the Norwegian crime novelist, whose private eye is Wallander, a kind of down on his luck cop who drinks too much, and his wife left him, and his daughter doesn't talk to him very often anymore, and his personal life is sort of for shit, but he gets the guys eventually.
I think my first exposure to this was in cartoons, because there's a whole genre of children's cartoons. Scooby-Doo was a detective series, as well as Josie and the Pussycats. Of course, that would all end with them singing some nifty little song, wearing cattails.
Which, Joseph, is now going to be in my head for the rest of the day.
Josie
Thank you very
and the
much.
Pussycats. And it continues with other iterations that are things that I had never necessarily gotten involved with, like Carmen Sandiego was a big kids thing. Inspector Gadget was another thing. DuckTales, and just to make sure our kids start out really young, Blue's Clues, which is for toddlers.
Wow,
is a detective series, and
that's true.
The man boy that is in charge of all of that is kind of like a simplistic, innocent Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
That's you. Your repertoire of TV history is very impressive, Joseph.
I was raised by a television, and that's just a fact. I mean, literally, I don't know where my parents were. Woke up, went to sleep. It was us and the TV.
Wow. It was so funny. Now, my favorite detectives are the everyman ones. So I adored Columbo. I just loved Columbo, where he'd sort of scratch his head and say, maybe I'm just not getting this. But, you said this, and then we discovered that, and then, help me figure it out. And he sort of hoodwinks the perpetrator along into providing more evidence that eventually convicts him of his heinous crime. And the other one I loved was Monk, who had just all kinds of complexes and OCD, and I think agoraphobia, and just cleanliness, hand-washing stuff, and was forever battling himself and his complexes. And in order to go after the greater good, to find out who done it. And I enjoyed watching him contend with himself as much as he contended with the criminal. And he had a helper who kept facilitating things and enticing him and, getting him out there in the field. So it's an interesting amplification here on what we're calling the archetype of the detective, that it has so many ways to present itself. From the hard-bitten sleuth to the little old lady to Scooby-Doo to somebody like Monk or Columbo. That, like all archetypes, there are any number of facets where underneath there lurks the search for the truth.
I was going through I go through phases where I read a lot of detective fiction, and then I put it down and I read something else. But in one of my phases where I was reading these and was like, why are these so satisfying? First of all, it was very gratifying to recall that Jung read detective and crime novels. So I have a little quote here from his biography by Deirdre Bair, just really quickly. She writes that his favorite form of recreational reading were creamy, the crime novels and murder mysteries of writers such as Agatha Christie, his favorite, or Simenon. He devoured them in the evening, so friends in England and France made sure to send the latest as soon as they were published. Okay, first of all, I just want to say I don't understand how that man read all of the stuff that he read and wrote all of the stuff that he wrote and had time to read crime fiction. But there you go. But I thought it was so interesting that, that I found them so incredibly gratifying and satisfying to read, and so did Jung. And so what I decided when I was thinking about what is it about these is that, they always start fairly predictably. There's some kind of crime. Usually, as you said, Deb, it's the discovery of the dead body.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like that sets everything in motion, right? It's like the question, who did this? Who done it? But it also shows a kind of break with order.
Yes.
So one of the things that's coming to mind is that British series Broadchurch.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, that is so good.
I really liked that.
There is a lot done around the grief of the family. It's actually really hard to watch because they really develop the grief of the family. But so they find this little boy goes. I think it's the boy goes missing, and then they find his body on the beach.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
And so then it's a couple of series of who did this, and boy, it's a really surprising ending. You don't see that coming.
Yeah.
But what happens? So order has been disrupted. A child has been killed, for heaven's sake. The fabric of polite society has been rent asunder brutally, violently. And we really need to see order restored. And that's what happens when they catch the guy. And often these end in a kind of courtroom scene where there's a confession or a conviction. And then, it's kind of like that Shakespearean restoration, that Elizabethan restoration of order that happens at the end of all of Shakespeare's tragedies. No matter how badly things have gone throughout the play, at the end, someone comes in and order has been restored, and it's very satisfying. So I think that's what it tickles in my psyche.
And today, and your reference to Broadchurch really lifts this up for me, Lisa, is we are just as interested in the why as we are in the who.
Yeah.
Of what happened here that would lead somebody to commit this crime. And some detective stories even lift up the perpetrator fairly early on. But what we're also interested in then is the psychology of the perpetrator. What's the backstory?
The motive.
That's right.
And his childhood history and this and that, and the grudge he had against this person for all kinds of reasons. And we go, oh, that's why he did it.
And so if we think about also the shadow of the detective, which all of us experience at times in ourselves, which is obsession, paranoia, and projection.
Yes.
It's the girlfriend going through your phone all the time and going through your laptop because she's sure that you've committed some infraction, you're having an affair, and she's going to investigate it and ferret it out. So that this spirit of suspicion of everyone and everything can creep into a culture or into a person, and then the energy of investigation becomes harnessed by our own shadow. And there actually is a term called apophenia, which is this tendency to find meaningful patterns in random or unrelated data. This is the distorted detective who is accumulating information, but forcing it into a certain kind of channel in order to justify something like confirmation bias. And when the shadow has grabbed hold of the detective, then all of a sudden, ruthlessness becomes normal, or highly unethical behavior is justified in order to kind of claw oneself to find what you think is out there. So there can be a way that it's not always virtuous, but the impulse can be tainted.
Yeah. And some detective stories feature detectives who are kind of playing fast and loose with the rules, and they're right on the edge of criminal activity themselves.
Yes.
You know? So I think there really is something about this being an image of sort of how we deal with the shadow side of the psyche, you know, and that the fact that if you spend too much time facing criminals, you kind of start to maybe turn into one yourself, or there is at least that temptation.
And analysts are detectives in a way, or investigators.
Yep.
That we are looking for clues that the unconscious gives us. Freud called these Freudian slips, he called them parapraxes, where all of a sudden the unconscious will blurt something out, and the analyst is trying to investigate the secret truth underneath the surface, but not in service to prosecuting, but that there is value in bringing things to light, regardless of what one does with that.
Well, and a lot of times someone comes into analysis with a bit of a mystery. You know, sometimes it's even framed that way. You know, I really want to be in a relationship, and somehow I've never been able to find a good relationship. And so right there, you know, and we're off. Well, what about that? And tell me stories, and let me, you know, go through, tell me about the past. What happened this week? You know, and we're looking for clues to put together a story that will make this make sense. So there's a search for meaning, and there's a search for patterns, and there's the desire to uncover something that's been hidden.
Yes, and lift it into consciousness, which is what I think symbolically happens in a good detective story, is that finding the perpetrator, discovering the secret, whatever it is like in a fairy tale. It's like finding the treasure. He finally gets a bride. Something is lifted into consciousness that is symbolized by finding the perpetrator. Aha! You know, the old trope of it was the butler, of, the clue was right there in plain sight, someone that you come across every day, and that's a part of one's own psyche that is so mundane and so ordinary that we never think to investigate it. And where is the butler in one's own psyche? That is actually preventing the achievement of a life goal, or somehow hindering one's own development.
Right. I think Jung had said somewhere that, you know, in each of us there is a secret, which is a rock upon which we must be broken, which is this truth that is too painful to know, not quite a crime, so to speak, but that in the investigation, the revelation of this is going to change us. And it's a necessary change, and it's part of the reality principle.
Right. And he says specifically that is, you know, that it's when he discovers that secret, that is when the analysis begins.
Yeah. That something must be set right. And that's exactly what happens in every good detective story, spy novel, murder mystery, is something is discovered. There is a secret. And we all breathe a sigh of relief when it is discovered and things are righted, and that right order is then restored, you know, versus the break with order you were talking about, Lisa.
And the order is social order, that detectives as part of law enforcement have to do with cultural norms, that it's the investigation of infractions to what the culture says is acceptable. So whether it's an IRS agent who is poring through every receipt to figure out if you've not done what the regulations say, or the crime detective who's going to come and investigate who robbed your house. But these are about norms and agreements that we've made in the culture, and that the detective is part of this process of enforcing cultural norms.
So the detective is the ego.
Yeah. Or the part of the superego. Yeah.
The superego, the ego are rational, analytic, fact-finding, intuitive capability. And then what happens in the detective stories is it does look like, okay, here's the culprit. Oh, I can take a breath. But what I'm thinking about here is just like in a dream, the next door neighbor is a part of you. That setting on some kind of farm is a part of you. And are we satisfied when we read a detective story or watch one that the culprit is out there versus do we take the next step and say, what part of me is that person? Or is it just a vindication of the powers of the ego to sleuth, deduct, intuit, persist? Is it a victory for the ego?
But you know what, and I think you were sort of saying this before. If we look at a detective story as if it were a dream, kind of.
Yes.
What has happened is that something has been made conscious.
Yes.
That's the real change. And, and I do think that mirrors, a kind of inner process, right? Is that, for example, something's been getting in our way of finding a satisfying love relationship. And if we do the sleuthing and we do it well, perhaps we discover that. And then something's been made conscious. Now, it's just going to tee up another, there's going to be another book or another episode because next week there'll be something new that we don't know about. But it does, I think, kind of lift up the tendency, the positive tendency we have to understand more, learn more, and try to unearth what's been hidden.
And this capacity to investigate is everywhere. Your car's making a funny noise. You take it to your favorite mechanic who is going to investigate and find the truth that this belt is loose. You're unwell. You go to a doctor.
Right.
We want to go to a doctor who is a good diagnostician, who is going to be our detective, and that MRIs are detective machines to see what's underneath it. That this detecting, investigating process is something we rely on in almost every domain. And if you're a parent, you're a sleuth. Like you're looking at those kids, that look she's got on her face, that he's doing something funny, and then all of a sudden mom is like the first detective in their lives, kind of looking around for what's going on here. And the very first detective is God. It's in the book of Genesis. All of a sudden, God's strolling through the garden, and he's like, wait a minute, Adam and Eve, what have you been up to here? Something is wrong. We need to do an investigation. And he does. He investigates. What were you guys up to over there? And why are you hiding in a bush?
So it's all about lifting things up into consciousness.
Yes, I think it is.
Whether the funny noise in your car, the bodily symptom that you have, or the strange case of the disappearing chocolate chip cookies from the pantry.
Joseph, you're saying if you're a parent, you're a detective, reminds me that when my kids were little, I'd say, did you brush your teeth? And I'd say, yeah, I brushed my teeth. And then I'd come upstairs and I'd feel the toothbrush and it would be dry. And I'd say, no, you didn't. And they'd be like, how did you know that? They thought it was like magic. And like night after night, I'd be like, nope, you're lying. And they couldn't figure out how I knew.
Perfect.
So these,
the truth is out there somewhere, like the X-Files.
And then there's the kid who, when you say, did you wash your hands? And they say, yeah, I washed my hands. And you say, well, okay, let me just take a little sniff. And then you find out that they didn't wash their hands. They just sort of passed the soap over them so it would smell like they washed their hands. And there's a criminal activity going on here.
Absolutely. And without that, we couldn't survive. Or it's an indigenous people that are investigating where the herd is and what are all the signs of where it is that you need something, and searching it out and detecting something. So it is actually central to the survival of human beings to be able to differentiate and detect, and particularly what is meaningful versus what is meaningless.
Well, and I was thinking earlier at some point during this conversation that, really the way we evolved these abilities probably primarily would be in hunting. Because you have to read the signs. You have to look very carefully. Where is the quarry? Did it pass this way? Did it break the tree as it ran past the little tree limb? And so now you know which way it went. Or, can you think like your quarry so that you'll be able to find it? I think that a detective on the hunt for a killer, it's very similar in some way to...
It's primal.
Yeah. To our capacity for hunting, which is how we survived in the early years of our species.
Cats are detectives, they're roaming around your house, opening up your cabinets, throwing things off the shelves, smelling everything. They are investigators. What they're looking for remains to be seen, but it is.
Well, it's just fun to knock things off the table, that's all.
Raccoons in your attic, they're conducting an investigation to see if there's something in there that they can make use of. So it is a spirit of need and curiosity and audacity driven by survival, and then that can be harnessed to culture and laws and raising kids and many other things, sometimes to bad effect. But for the most part, I think it is in service to life.
To knowledge,
I am so curious about, in my quest for being the detective here, I was thinking about who are the criminals? What are the categories of crime? And how do they relate to our own shadows of the kinds of criminals that the detectives, our consciousness is seeking? And I was thinking about just sort of the disruptor who just likes to disrupt the order of the world and is in it for the sake of the game, for the sake of power, like the Joker, for example, of just above any kind of order or morality. Then there's the enemy, of that somebody develops an enemy who is forever out to get him. And I'm thinking of Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, who Moriarty is the disruptor. He just likes to do what he likes to do. But he's also the personal enemy of Sherlock Holmes. And they have a personal vendetta that they are forever trying to settle. One of my favorites is the outlaw. And I think we all have a secret place where we kind of relate to the outlaw. Didn't you relate to Jesse James and those exciting scenes of train robberies and the secret hope that they're going to get away with it? No? Am I the only one? I'm the only renegade here?
No, I think there's plenty of examples in literature and movies where we're cheering on the one who's going to break the rules or change the system.
Yep. Then there is the guy who is himself, and we've kind of touched on this in some of the detectives, of who has his own pathology. Who was it? Nero Wolfe in the Rex Stout novels is so fat that he can't even climb a set of stairs. Monk had all of his quirks and obsessiveness. Dexter is himself a psychopath who commits crimes to fight crimes. There's the serial killer.
Dexter's interesting and complicated because his father recognizes that he's a psychopath, and that it's incorrigible, that he is going to hurt people and he is going to kill them. And what he does is he gives Dexter these rules that you have to identify this subgroup of people that you can act out against, and then you can relieve this horrible tension inside of you. So if you follow this narrow channel, then you can justify this murderous impulse that's been in you since you were a kid. So it's a much crazier kind of mix of things that goes together. But he is more like the Furies. It's this primordial spirit of vengeance that has no empathy at all.
Yeah. But it's an interesting example of one way to deal with shadow. The shadow that is all of us, operationalize it. Have a supervisor in the name of Dexter's father who sets some rules. That takes me to the bad cop or the corrupt official. Aha! The person who is supposedly in charge of overseeing and upholding the proper order of things is in fact subverting it, and might even be like the double agent in spy novels. Another one is the gangster who's in business. The gangster boss is running a business. And some of the murders and other crimes are just, it's just business. Don't take it so personally. Of that kind of distance from a shadow that is, heinous to most of us. Then we touched on this too, the cunning killer who's in plain sight. There's an episode on the Benedict Cumberbatch series of Sherlock Holmes, my total personal favorite, who's a cab driver. This is total spoiler alert. Too late. I said spoiler alert after letting out the culprit. But, and he says that, who would ever suspect a humble, unassuming, older man cab driver? And the hired gun, for the right amount of money, it's just business.
The mercenary.
And last but not least, the femme fatale. So we could have a lot of fun with that and what that might indicate in our shadows. But this is all about shadow. The everlasting, ever ongoing, never finished encounters between ego and consciousness and the unconscious. And I think we all get a lot of vicarious pleasure out of it. It's not my shadow. So I enjoy watching
someone else get caught.
Right. Somebody else gets caught. And the kind of techniques required to out the culprit, the shadow, the criminal.
And that finding the shadow, finding the one who's carrying the shadow.
Yeah.
And at the very least, having the confrontation, which is part of Jungian work. Not necessarily to always put the shadow in jail, although sometimes you do. There is some shadow material that we can know about, but simply cannot be permitted into the outer world, although it is alive in the inner world. But in order to be able to contain something, we have to investigate it and discover it.
Yep.
Because it's probably been doing things without our knowledge in the back.
And just as in a good detective story, there's a huge measure of relief that, oh, God, I never realized that about myself. Oh, my God, this is what it is. Now I know that about myself. And, it's not, it may be the symbolic equivalent of a secret or a crime or even a dead body, but usually not.
Well, you think about the manhunts, like the Zodiac Killer, things like that, where the collective becomes so frightened, and that when you catch the culprit, that now people can sleep at night because the evil one has been contained.
Mhm.
So there's definitely a response when we finally know and
Mhm.
contain.
Today's dream comes from a man who's 33 years old and works as a retail worker. And he calls the dream Friends in the Mine. And here's the dream. I awake in a cavernous underground mine. Metal stairs and railing lead to metal doors attached to the rocky walls of the mine. A large stone building stands in the middle of the mine, connecting the floor and the ceiling. It too has metal stairs and doors, which I know lead to rooms or apartment units carved from the stone. In the dream, I'm aware that this mine is owned by my uncle. I turn around to see 3 old friends who I have not seen in years. We greet each other meekly and with no fanfare. One friend seems to have forgotten my name, but soon remembers as we shake hands. So he notes for context, I had this dream the same day I began listening to your podcast. Other than that, I'm in the midst of changing careers, and the main feelings were curiosity, wonder, and loneliness. And then for associations, he says, I can't say for sure if my waking self recognizes the 3 friends in the dream, but I do associate them with people who I used to hang out with in my early 20s. I don't see them as much because life has taken us on very different journeys since those days.
So just jumping right into it,
Yeah.
to me, this is a dream about Hades.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly, I was noodling it around, but that last sentence, that one of my friends seems to have forgotten my name, and that when the dead pass into Hades, they have to drink from the river of Lethe, the river that makes them forget their old lives. So that seems significant, kind of going into the unconscious and trying to learn how to navigate the terrain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I had that sense too, right? This is underground and it's a mine. So a
Yes.
mine is something that's underground, but there's something valuable down there
Exactly.
that we want to bring up to consciousness. Now, I wish I knew more about his uncle because this mine is owned by his uncle. But I will say that it seems significant that he associates these people with people he used to hang out with in his 20s. So somehow perhaps he's getting back in touch with old values as he contemplates moving forward into a career change.
One of the myths of Tartarus, which is one of the underworld myths, is that when Saturn is overthrown, he is thrown into the underworld. But when he is in the underworld, he creates a paradise. It is a golden world where all things are lovely and, in a sense, almost perfect, because the god of order and structure is now working underneath the ground. And that reminds me a little of the mine, the order, the precious resources. There's a whole city in this underworld that he now has access to. To me, this is like almost like the setting of a dream. That there's this opening scene, and now we know where he is. And the question that I have going forward is, so what's next? So you've found this remarkable resource. It's friendly. You have people that you know and allies in the underworld. Are you going to mine some gold? Are you going to, what are you going to do with all this in there?
I was struck by the contrast between this mine, just the setting of the rocky walls, so hard to penetrate, and then these metal stairs and a railing, and this building again of metal. So here are all these hard surfaces. And then the human factor comes in. there's an uncle who is does not appear in person, but who is above ground, who owns the mine. And then there are 3 old friends, and they are people he used to hang out with. So here's the human factor, and it would appear that they are all male. That this is a dream from a male dreamer with the other characters in the cast are also male. And what kind of masculine energy are we talking about? Our dreamer is, he says, other than that, he says, other than listening to our podcast for the first time, I'm in the midst of changing careers as an almost sort of a casual fact of life. But changing careers is a really big deal. And here are people from his 20s, and our dreamer is 33. I'd be very curious as to tell me more about these friends.
Yeah.
What did you used to do when you were in your 20s, when you hung out together? Did you go bowling? Did you go camping? Was there a favorite pub or bar you went to? What was the feeling tone of more carefree years? That's my fantasy. And tell me about your uncle. The uncle is the one who's above ground. And hey, if you own a mine, you're pretty capable. You have a lot of operations to oversee and administer. You've got payroll that you've got to meet.
And a lot of access to resources that are down underground.
Right. Exactly. So I'm so curious about the above and below of the uncle and what an owner of a mine represents, as opposed to, here we are, and there are 4 of them, 3 friends and our dream ego, which represent the potential for a kind of wholeness, according to Jung, who felt that the number 4 and 4-ness represents sort of a completeness. So we have 4 directions and 4 apostles and 4 functions of the ego. And most buildings that are created by conscious people have 4 corners. So there's a potential here underground that represents stability. So this is one of those dreams where I really wish we had the dreamer.
Yeah.
Because this could make for a very lively discussion, but we will leave it to the dreamer to see what he can make of what we've made of it.
Thanks for listening. To submit a dream, suggest an episode topic, or join our mailing list, visit our website, thisjungianlife.com. If you enjoyed this episode, give us 5 stars and a good review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure to click the notification bell to be alerted whenever we upload videos. And keep up with all things TJL by following us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and TikTok.